homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. I am making a pork tenderloin with rosemary sauce tonight. And this is a recipe that I actually started making in my 20s, way back in the day when I was just a teensy teenage girl. I used to have a subscription to Glamour magazine, which is so funny considering where my life is now. And when I had that subscription to Glamour, one of the things that they had come out with was a cookbook called Gourmet on the Run. And I bought a copy of it. I was in my early 20s and I was just learning how to cook. And it turns out it's actually a really fantastic cookbook. I have long since not picked up a Glamour magazine. It's been, gosh, probably more than 20 years since I've looked at a Glamour magazine. But it turns out the cookbook is so good that it's still on my shelf. It is out of print. And I had a copy and it was falling apart. The binding had fallen apart on it. And I happened to be at a thrift store and found a copy at a thrift store that the binding wasn't falling apart on. So I bought it twice. I tracked down the author many years ago. She's gone on to other things since working for Glamour magazine as a recipe writer, and just said, thank you. Thank you so much for writing this book, because it really taught me some basic skills in the kitchen when I didn't know anything, and I still use recipes from it to this day. So it's a great recipe. It's very simple. What we have in this skillet is a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of olive oil. And to this, we are going to add some beautiful pork tenderloin. We're going to let this skillet get good and hot first. And I don't actually normally cook with pork tenderloin anymore because we usually buy a half to a whole pig every year. And when you buy a half to a whole pig, the tenderloin is the muscle that goes along the spine in the back. And that's part of why it's tender, because it doesn't do a whole lot of work. But it's also the muscle that is attached to a lot of pork chops. And so if you are getting a half a pig, a lot of times your choice is you get the tenderloin or you get some pork chops. And because we really like pork chops, we often opt for more pork chops and don't get the pork tenderloin. So it's actually been many years since I've bought a pork tenderloin. However, I've recently been playing around a lot with some charcuterie. I've been making homemade bacon. I've got a batch of corned beef going. I've got a batch of pancetta going. And there was a recipe in the same book that I've been using for Canadian bacon. And the only way you can make Canadian bacon is from a pork tenderloin. And we happen to have a restaurant supply store not too far from us. And so I decided that I was going to go buy a whole pork tenderloin from that restaurant supply store and make some Canadian bacon. And then I only needed about 4 pounds of that for the Canadian bacon. And that gave me another 5 pounds of just tenderloins. And so I thought I'd make this dinner tonight as a special treat, because it's not something we do. You can make this recipe with pork chops, and I have done that many, many times. So it does work quite well with just pork chops. So I am searing the sides of this beautiful pork tenderloin. I'm going to put a little salt and pepper on the side that isn't down. And then when I flip it, I will put some more salt and pepper down on it. And what we're gonna do here is sear on all sides. So let's see what we've got here. Oh, that looks pretty nice. Let me give that a quick flip. And I would guess in a nice hot pan, this is probably gonna take a couple of minutes per side. A little more salt. A little more pepper. All right, guys, I will bring you back when this has been seared on all 4 sides. All right, that didn't take too long because my pan is pretty ripping hot. I am gonna add about a tablespoon of dried rosemary leaves, and this is rosemary from my garden. And this, honestly, is the recipe that made me fall in love with the combination of rosemary and thyme. And I still use it all the time. I really love it. And about a half a teaspoon of dried thyme. This is also from my garden. I'm putting some on the meat, but I'm putting some in the pan, and you'll see why here in a minute. And then I'm gonna turn my heat way down right now because I'm really hot. And I'm gonna add a cup of vermouth. I actually have just over 3/4 of a cup here. And then I have a little bit of white wine. White wine will work in a pinch. Vermouth is fortified wine, so it's just slightly stronger. It's a little bit more like a sherry. I love these little small, inexpensive bottles of wine for cooking. It's a very handy way to cook. A very hot pan. I'm then going to cover. I don't have an exact fit here, but it's pretty close. And I'm going to cook this for about 10 minutes on medium-low. And then I'm going to actually temp it with a thermometer, and we'll make sure that it's done in the middle. These are really fat pork tenderloins. Pork tenderloin is usually not quite as fat as these are. This happened to be a really big one. So yeah, we're going to come back in a couple of minutes. And if I need to, I'm gonna add water. If this is gonna boil dry really quickly, I'm gonna add a little bit of water to it because we need that liquid in there to help braise that meat. So what I'm gonna do is give this about 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna flip them and give it another 5 minutes, and we'll see where we're at. Not quite there. Not surprised. These are really thick. I'm going to flip these one more time. We're up to about 130. We're looking for about 140. There's going to be some carryover that will take us to 145, which is about where we want to be. So we're going to give these 5 more minutes. Let's see where we're at. Well, that's definitely done. Yeah, I overshot it a little bit. I was looking for 145, so more like 160. That was very quick, that last couple minutes. So I'm just gonna set these aside and cover them with tin foil to keep them warm. And then what we're gonna do here is add a half a cup of half and half to my pan. Bring that temperature back up and bring this to a simmer, and we're gonna reduce this down to the most delicious sauce. Very simple. Literally salt, pepper, rosemary, thyme, a little bit of vermouth or white wine, and some cream. That's it. Very simple, and honestly, some of the best simple meals you will ever eat. Side note on pork, the USDA approved temperature, internal temperature for pork is 145. So that's the temperature that they want you to cook it to. You can typically cook things to 140, and then the carryover heat, which is the fact that a piece of meat will continue to heat after you've taken it off the heat for a few minutes, will usually carry you over that last 5 degrees. So typically I like to pull it at 140. If you have heard stories from your grandma or from other sources that undercooked pork is going to kill you, that might have been true in 1900. It is not true in 2022. The concern around pork was a parasite called trichinosis, and it is definitely not something you want to mess with. It can lodge in your muscles, and basically you're stuck with it forever. Even if they're dead, you get scarring from it. So trichinosis is what they were concerned with. There has not been a case of trichinosis in USDA inspected beef in an incredibly long time. It is basically non-existent anymore in inspected meat. The biggest cases of it come from bear. For people that are actually hunting, and they're hunting bear, that's where you see trichinosis when it's undercooked. So if you have a friend who hunts bear and they offer you some jerky, or they offer you some nice, beautiful red in the middle roast, don't eat it. That's where, or the jerky was not cooked to the appropriate temperature and just dried. That is where you start to get problems with trichinosis. It is very, very, very rare in inspected pork. And so it's really not an issue. And for the longest time growing up, my grandmother would cook pork when I was a little kid, and I mean, it was shoe leather. It was so cooked and so dry that it curled up at the ends, and it was truly terrible. You do not need to cook pork to that extent. It doesn't have to be done to the point where it is dry and nasty. So you want to pull it when it's at about 140. It is worth having a thermometer for that reason, and then let the carryover heat take it that last 5 degrees, and it will be absolutely delicious. If you see a tiny bit of pink in there, that's okay. It doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. All right, that's about done. So what I'm looking for here is, see how when I run my spatula through there, it takes a bit to sink back in. That means it's got some nice viscosity. We've got some really nice texture there. That's what I'm looking for. I am going to taste this and just make sure there's enough salt. This recipe only calls for a half a teaspoon of salt, and that's partially because everything is going to be reduced down into this sauce. If you've got a lot of salt at the beginning, it's going to be super salty by the time you get to this point. I think this is good. It tastes delightful. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. So we're about done. We're going to let that meat rest for a few minutes while my potatoes finish cooking, and then we'll plate it up. All right, you guys, I put my pork chops back in the pan just because it looks so delicious and kind of coated them a little bit with that sauce. I typically serve this with potatoes and a nice salad. I love it with potatoes because this sauce makes the most delectable gravy ever on a potato, not to mention the sauce on the pork chop itself. But super simple weeknight meal. If you've got some thawed out tenderloins and the sides are already done or something you can put together quickly, this literally is 15 minutes to the time that you put it on a dinner plate. So really quick, absolutely delicious. This will serve 4. These tenderloins are huge. They're about 3/4 pound a piece. So this is really enough for 4 people. And looking back, I could have easily have just cut those in half and done 4 portions that way. It would have cooked a little quicker. But yeah, this is a wonderful weeknight meal, and maybe worth telling your butcher to save the tenderloin and not get quite so many pork chops when you buy half a pig. It is absolutely delicious. If you like this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment and subscribe. I have new content coming out every week. Thanks so much, you guys. We'll see you next time.